1779, Ferncliff Road NE, Atlanta, Georgia. A quiet, tree-lined neighborhood tucked behind hedges of blooming azaleas and clusters of old oaks. The property had once belonged to Julie Harris, the five-time Tony Award-winning actress best known for her roles in The Member of the Wedding and the original The Haunting, 1963. Her southern escape, far from the clamor of Broadway, had always been whispered about among locals, some saying she chose the home because it was already haunted when she bought it in the 1970s. She passed away in 2013. The house stood unoccupied for nearly a decade, though agents claimed the delay had more to do with structural issues than any supernatural reason. That changed in 2022, when a young married couple from Charleston, Daniel and Leila Granger, both in their early 30s, purchased the property. He was a photographer specializing in abandoned spaces. She was a former stage actress turned interior designer. They claimed to have fallen in love with the home's architecture. Wide eaves, ivy-covered brick, and a sunroom that caught fire-orange dusk light through stained glass. They didn't know what they were walking into. At first, it was idyllic. Leila posted Instagram stories of clawfoot tubs and restored parquet floors. Daniel set up a darkroom in the basement and began photographing the interior, obsessed with capturing the soul of the space. In interviews, he said he could feel the house breathing. But strange things started happening. Quiet at first, barely worth noting. The piano in the sitting room would emit a single note in the dead of night, always the same one, middle C. Daniel's film negatives were frequently ruined by what he called a smudged blur, like a face moving too fast across the frame. Leila heard weeping faint, feminine, always behind a closed door. She once called out, thinking it was a neighbor's child. Silence answered. In February 2023, Daniel found a bundle of aged playbills behind a loose wall panel in the attic crawlspace. All were from Julie Harris's performances. Handwritten on one, in faded ink. "You must become the role. You must let her in." Leila dismissed it as an actor's note. Daniel, however, kept it pinned above his desk. Friends noticed a change in Leila first. Her southern charm frayed into distracted silence. At dinner parties, she'd speak in an affected voice, clipped, theatrical. One friend described it as like watching her try to be someone else entirely. She began dressing in vintage clothing, often 1950s-era cocktail dresses, even around the house. She took to reciting lines from The Haunting in the hallway mirror, only stopping when Daniel intervened. She said she felt closer to Julie. Daniel wasn't immune either. His photography became erratic. He stopped showing his work publicly. His final uploaded series on Instagram, titled Ferncliff in Winter, featured only out-of-focus shots of a woman in a white dressing gown, standing in corners, often blurred at the face. Leila insists it wasn't her. In July 2023, a neighbor called police after seeing Leila outside the home, barefoot and dazed, murmuring something about hearing the walls breathe again. Paramedics took her in. She was discharged the next day, but what she said to the EMTs was never officially released. One nurse later claimed she whispered, "I tried to leave, but she wouldn't let me walk down the stairs." Daniel remained in the house alone after that. Leila moved in with her sister in Savannah and refused to speak about the home again. Within weeks, Daniel stopped responding to messages. By August, realtors quietly listed the house again. Today, the house is still unsold. Locals say the front porch light flickers on some nights, even though the electricity has long been disconnected. Real estate agents refuse to show it after dusk. One urban explorer who broke in last year said the entire sunroom was covered in old theater programs pinned to the glass. When he reviewed the photos, every single frame was corrupted except one, which showed a woman's pale hand resting on the stair rail, partially transparent. Historians claim Julie Harris always had a deep spiritual connection to her roles. Some say she brought something home with her after filming The Haunting. Others believe she simply left too much of herself in the walls. The Grangers never returned. Leila divorced Daniel in 2024 and now teaches drama to children but refuses to work in theaters built before 1980. As for Daniel, he hasn't been seen since the fall of 2023. His last known photograph was mailed anonymously to a photography magazine editor. It showed a silhouette in the attic window of 1779, Ferncliff Road standing completely still, eyes white and unfocused, wearing a vintage black dress. The caption scribbled on the back simply read, "She never left." The fall air settled heavy over Atlanta in late September. At 1779, Ferncliff Road, the garden had grown wild, as if mourning the absence of care. Ivy now stretched aggressively across the outer brick, pushing up through the cracks like veins trying to choke the house from the outside. Weeds pushed through the flagstone path. The once trimmed azalea bushes curled inward like shamed animals, their branches dark and brittle. Inside, the house had changed. Though technically vacant since Daniel Granger's unexplained disappearance, subtle signs hinted otherwise. Mail still arrived, yet the mailbox was always empty by morning. Porch lights flickered even without power. The scent of old roses dried, decayed lingered in the front hall, as if someone had just walked through with a funeral bouquet. And then there were the sounds. Neighbors swore they heard footsteps at night, deliberate, slow pacing the second-floor landing. One woman walking her dog claimed to hear someone rehearsing lines. She recounted the voice as feminine, not unkind, but tired, repeating the same passage from the Bell of Amherst, over and over, like a scratched vinyl. "I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too?" That month, after nearly a year away, Leila Granger came back. She didn't announce it. No moving truck, no fanfare. She arrived alone, around twilight, driving a rented beige sedan with out-of-state plates. She parked beneath the heavy limbs of the live oak and sat motionless in the car for almost an hour. Her face was gaunt, her once sleek auburn hair now limp, tied back with a piece of torn black ribbon. When she finally stepped out, she walked toward the house barefoot, holding a single suitcase and a framed photograph of her and Daniel taken in the foyer on their first day in the home. They looked so hopeful in the picture, young, glowing, unaware. The front door, which had reportedly been boarded shut by police after Daniel's disappearance, was somehow unlocked. Inside, the air was frigid. Not the absence of heat kind of cold, but something deeper, like the chill that creeps into the bones of old buildings where time itself has gotten stuck. The furniture remained where they'd left it. The velvet love seat, the mahogany console table, the upright piano by the bay window. But there was a layer of dust now, thin as ash, over everything except the sunroom. That space gleamed, untouched, as if someone were still tending to it daily. Leila walked to the parlor and stood before the grand mirror above the fireplace. Her reflection flickered a soft stutter, like a faulty projection reel. For a second, it wasn't her face looking back. It was Julie's, weary, hollow-eyed, yet fiercely composed. Leila blinked, and the image was gone. She didn't sleep. Instead, she wandered the house, turning on lights that shouldn't have worked, pausing at the top of the staircase as if waiting to be summoned. Somewhere, a record player spun a warped version of Chopin. But there was no player, just music. At 3:12 a.m., she entered the attic. No one had been there since Daniel vanished, but everything was intact. The bundle of playbills still sat on the desk. And there, pinned to the opposite wall, was something new, a black and white photo, slightly curled at the edges. It showed Daniel or someone wearing his clothes seated at the edge of the bed, head bowed, as though in prayer. The lighting was unnatural. Shadows curled tightly around him, too dark, too precise. In the far corner of the image stood a second figure. It was Leila, but Leila had never posed for such a picture. Underneath the photo, a line had been scratched into the plaster with a fingernail or sharp pin. "You let her in. You don't get to let her out." Over the following days, Leila fell into a kind of trance-like existence. She wore the same ivory nightgown each evening, took tea in the sunroom at precisely 4 p.m., and resumed speaking in that affected accent, clipped vowels, theatrical pacing as if she were still performing. Visitors began appearing. Not real people, but presences. Leila spoke to them sometimes sweetly, other times with rage. She set out 3 teacups during her rituals. Once, she was heard arguing with someone in the dining room, repeating, "This is my house now. I won't be erased." When the wind howled through the chimney, it carried voices. Not words, more like stage whispers, layered atop each other. Sometimes they built into a crescendo that ended in sudden silence, like the curtain drop of an unseen performance. One night, while standing in the darkened hallway, Leila began to laugh, softly at first, then louder, then violently. She collapsed to the ground, clutching her stomach, shrieking with laughter until she began to sob. Outside, the moonlight caught something in the upper attic window. A silhouette, thin, elegant, a woman's figure still as marble. Carolyn Meeks, who lived across the street, documented the events in a journal she later gave to a local historian. One entry read, October 22, 2023, saw her standing on the front porch. White dress. Looked like Julie Harris, I swear to God. She waved at me, but when I waved back, she was gone. Just gone. The air smelled like stage dust and perfume. Another read. October 29, 2023. Lights keep coming on upstairs. Same room. The one that's supposed to be empty. I called the city, they said the meter shows no electricity connected. What the hell is going on in that place? Rain had settled over Atlanta for 4 straight days. The kind of slow, steady rainfall that seeps into everything, the walls, the carpets, the bones. At Ferncliff Road, the rain didn't sound natural. It tapped like fingers across the windows, impatient, erratic, like someone knocking softly again and again, waiting to be let in. Leila awoke not in her bed, but seated upright on the velvet chaise in the sunroom, a wool blanket draped over her knees. Her skin was clammy with sweat, her throat hoarse as if she'd been talking in her sleep. She didn't remember how she'd gotten there. Across the room, on the antique dressmakers formed by the glass doors, hung a gown. A theatrical piece-fitted waist, flowing skirt, deep midnight blue. Satin with a crushed velvet shawl. She didn't own it, yet she recognized it. It was the dress Julie Harris had worn in the second act of The Lark, a Broadway revival in the early 60s. Leila had seen photographs, black and white publicity stills from an old magazine. But now the dress was real here, as if it had stepped out of time and demanded to be worn again. There was no note, no explanation, just a sense that it was meant for her. She stood slowly, her bare feet touching the cool tile floor, and crossed the room. Her hand hovered over the fabric. It smelled of cedar and lavender and something dry, like dust stirred in backstage curtains. When she touched it, the lights in the hallway flickered, humming low like breath on a microphone. Upstairs, a door creaked open. She wasn't alone. That evening, the neighborhood children stayed away from Ferncliff Road, as they always did. The street had developed a quiet superstition about the house, something unspoken, passed between families in polite whispers and nervous glances. Ferncliff wasn't a place for costumes and candy. It was a place for shadows. But at 8:12 p.m., 2 teenagers boys from nearby Morningside High dared each other to knock. Their story later made its way onto Reddit, under a now-deleted thread titled, Julie Harris Lives? According to their post, the porch was dry despite the lingering mist. One boy, Luke, approached the door while the other recorded on his phone. Before he could knock, the door creaked open on its own. Music played faintly inside a piano, soft, hesitant, like someone practicing in the dark. Then came a woman's voice, calm and clear, with an edge of exhaustion. You've come for the final audition, haven't you? Luke turned to run, but his feet slipped out from under him, not on water, but on what he described as flower petals strewn across the porch. Roses. Dozens of crushed, rotting roses. The door slammed shut. They fled without looking back. When police later followed up, there were no petals, no open door, no music. The front stoop was bone dry, save for a single item resting at the threshold. A playbill from The Haunting, 1963, yellowed by time, with a fresh ink signature on the cover. It read simply, "She's ready." In the hours that followed, Leila locked every door in the house. She pulled curtains tight, dimmed the hallway sconces, and drew heavy blackout shades in the parlor. At 11:30 p.m., she lit 3 white candles on the hearth and placed the old photograph of herself, and Daniel directly in front of them. She whispered lines to the flames, full passages from Emily Dickinson, Eugene O'Neill, even the bell of Amherst. The walls answered with soft creaks. The air felt tight, like a stage before curtain when the lights dim and the audience inhales in perfect unison. Then came the knock. Not at the door. From inside the walls. It began in the dining room, sharp and rhythmic, as if someone were knocking to be let out. Leila froze. Her body no longer felt like her own, it felt like a puppet held by wires, waiting for cue lines. She turned her head slowly toward the fireplace and whispered, "Julie, I'm listening." The knock shifted. Now it was behind her, in the parlor, beneath the floorboards, above the ceiling. Every surface around her seemed to echo with life. And then silence. She waited. The quiet stretched out into something unbearable. When she finally turned, the gown had vanished from the dressmaker's form. She climbed the staircase slowly, gripping the banister like a rope on a sinking ship. Each step creaked louder than the last, and the chandelier above her, dusty and warped by time, began to sway, though no air moved in the house. At the top landing, the attic door stood open. Soft, golden light spilled from within. She took a step inside. The room was transformed, the walls now papered with old playbills, costume sketches, pages of handwritten dialogue, and blocking notes pinned in meticulous rows. A makeup mirror glowed with vintage bulbs. A dressing table had reappeared, covered in powder, rouge, and false lashes arranged just so. And seated in front of it was Leila, or what appeared to be her. But this figure dressed in the blue gown had her back to the door, posture rigid, hands resting lightly on the vanity. The real Leila, or what we might call her, stood frozen in the threshold, watching herself brush her own hair. Then, without turning, the figure spoke. "You were never cast for the lead. You only read the understudy." Leila tried to back away, but her feet didn't move. Her reflection, no longer under her control, stared into the mirror, smiling thinly, lips moving on their own. "You let me in, and now the stage is mine." By the morning after Halloween, the rain had stopped. A low fog hung in the trees like memory, draping the pines and oaks in sheets of silence. The first light touched the stained glass windows of 1779, Ferncliff Road, casting fractured red and gold beams into the empty street. And for the first time in months, the house appeared still. Too still. When Leila's sister, Margot, arrived that afternoon, having not heard from Leila in over a week, she found the front gate ajar. The driveway was soaked with fallen leaves, slick and rotting. No car, no sign of activity. But the house was unlocked. Margot stepped inside cautiously. The scent hit her, first musty stage curtains, old perfume, and something deeper, the metallic undertone of heat and mildew and something rotting. She called out her sister's name. No reply. In the living room, the fireplace had been relit, the embers still glowed faintly. 3 white candles had melted down to pools of wax on the hearth. A single teacup rested in the center of the coffee table, still warm. The photograph of Leila and Daniel had been removed from its frame, and in its place was a headshot of Julie Harris, in character as Eleanor Lance. On the back, written in red ink, "I am still here." Margot ascended the staircase slowly, calling for Leila with increasing urgency. At the top, she noticed something odd, the scent of roses. Fresh, strong. She followed it to the attic. The door was open, but what was once an eerie shrine to theater with notes, costumes, and ghostly paraphernalia was now stripped bare. The walls were empty. No dressing table, no makeup mirror, no gown. Just a single wooden chair, positioned in the middle of the room, facing a boarded-up window. And on the chair was a cassette recorder. Margot pressed play. First, only silence. Then static. Then a voice. It was Leila's, quiet, breathy, as though she were speaking from far away. "I didn't know the script had already been written. I thought I could change it. I thought if I acted well enough, I'd survive the final act." A long pause. "But she's not angry. That's what's strange. She's lonely. She's always been lonely." The tape clicked to a stop. Margot backed out of the room, trembling. She left the house and called the police. What followed became part of public record. When authorities searched the home, they found no trace of Leila Granger. No clothes, no suitcase, not even her toothbrush. Her name was on the deed, and yet every document had vanished as if she'd never legally existed there. The only clue came from the basement. Hidden beneath the floorboards of Daniel's old darkroom, they found hundreds of developed photographs many never seen before. They were all variations of one image. The house, shot from inside, from angles impossible to reach, from ceiling corners, behind mirrors, inside closets. In each photo there was a figure, sometimes in shadow, sometimes at the edge of the frame, sometimes seated in a chair or reflected in a pane of glass. A woman, pale, dressed in black, expression unreadable. In two of the final frames, Leila could be seen standing in the hallway, arms open as if inviting someone in. Daniel Granger's body was never recovered. He remains missing, and now, officially, so does Leila. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at the Alliance Theater in downtown Atlanta, postmarked with no return address. Inside was a single 8x10 photograph, printed on glossy archival paper. It showed the empty attic room of 1779, Ferncliff Road, the wooden chair in the center, but this time, occupied. Sitting upright was a woman with short hair, a composed smile, and hands folded in her lap. She wore the midnight blue gown. The lighting was theatrical, a single spotlight from above. Her eyes were fixed forward, like an actress awaiting her cue. But the face in the photograph, it wasn't Leila. It wasn't Julie. It was a blend of both, as if something had merged behind the eyes, something ancient and patient. On the back of the photograph were the words, "The understudy has stepped into the role." The house was finally boarded up by the city in early 2024. Several attempts were made to sell it, but no agent lasted longer than a week. They all reported unease. One swore the house rearranged itself. Another said she found footprints on the ceiling. As of now, it remains uninhabited. But sometimes, just before sunset, when the shadows stretch long across Ferncliff Road, passers-by claim to hear a faint woman's voice drifting through the broken windows, reciting a line from The Haunting in perfect clarity. The house is alive. It wants me. It needs me. And somewhere, deep behind those walls, an audience of shadows rises for a performance that never ends. Curtain. Lights fade. Silence.